Chapter 1: The Transformation.
Aiden's eyes fluttered open, his senses immediately overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sights and sounds surrounding him. Gone were the vast, rolling hills and towering peaks of his dragon homeland. In their place, a sprawling forest of towering pines and a winding river that glimmered in the morning light. Panic began to swell within his chest as he struggled to make sense of his altered reality. With trembling hands, Aiden pushed himself upright, only to be met with a startling revelation. His hands were no longer the powerful, clawed appendages he had known his entire life, but slender, delicate digits that belonged to a human. Aiden's heart raced as he examined this new form, tracing the contours of his face, the soft skin, the lack of scales and horns that had once defined him. "What sorcery is this?" he cried out, his voice a foreign, high-pitched sound that did not belong to him. Aiden leapt to his feet, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated, a far cry from the graceful, airborne agility he had once possessed as a dragon.
Aiden's mind reeled as he tried to make sense of this inexplicable transformation. Had he been cursed? Had some dark magic been inflicted upon him while he slept?
The questions swirled in his mind, accompanied by a growing sense of dread and disorientation. With a surge of determination, Aiden began to search his surroundings, seeking any familiar landmark or sign that could guide him back to his dragon community. But as he scanned the unfamiliar forest, he realized with a sinking feeling that he had no idea where he was or how to return home. Aiden's thoughts turned to his kin, the proud dragons who had raised him from hatchling to adulthood. Surely, they would be able to help him, to reverse this unsettling transformation. Without hesitation, he set off through the forest, his new human legs carrying him as swiftly as they could manage. As Aiden navigated the dense, unfamiliar terrain, he found himself constantly stumbling and tripping, his balance and coordination betraying him at every turn.
The once effortless task of traversing the forest floor now proved to be a monumental challenge, and Aiden couldn't help but long for the power and grace of his dragon form. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as Aiden pushed deeper into the forest, his desperation growing with each passing minute. He called out for his kin, his voice echoing through the trees, but he was met only with the chirping of birds and the rustling of the wind. Just as Aiden was about to collapse from exhaustion, a familiar sight came into view: the towering, snow-capped peaks of the Drakenau, the mountain range that had been the home of his dragon community for generations. With renewed vigor, Aiden pressed on, determined to reach the safety and familiarity of his kin. But as he approached the base of the mountains, Aiden's steps began to falter. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, and he soon found himself facing a well-trodden path that led directly to the entrance of the dragon's lair. Steeling himself, Aiden stepped forward, only to be greeted by the wary, distrustful gazes of his fellow dragons. "Who dares approach our sacred sanctuary?" a deep, rumbling voice thundered, and Aiden's heart sank as he recognized the voice of his clan's elder, Valthar. Aiden opened his mouth to speak, to explain his plight, but the words caught in his throat as he took in the expressions of his kin. Their scales gleamed with a mixture of suspicion and fear, their eyes narrowed as they regarded him with obvious distrust. I am Aiden," he managed to choke out, his voice trembling. "I've returned home, but something has happened to me. I've been transformed, and I don't know how to dash." "Transformed?" Valthar interrupted, his wings unfurling in a display of dominance. "You dare to come before us in this human form? You are no longer one of us, Aiden. You are a cursed abomination, a blight upon our community." Aiden's eyes widened in horror as the words sank in, his heart shattering at the realization that his kin had rejected him. But I am the same Aiden you've known since hatchling," he pleaded, taking a step forward, only to be met with a chorus of snarls and the sudden appearance of razor-sharp talons. "Stay back, human, Valthar growled, his words laced with venom. "You are no longer welcome here. Leave, and do not return, lest we see you as a threat to be eliminated." Aiden's legs buckled beneath him as the weight of his exile sank in. His kin, the ones he had trusted and loved, had cast him out,
their eyes filled with fear and disgust at the sight of his transformed state. Tears streamed down his face as he turned and fled, the sound of the dragon's roars echoing in his ears. As he ran, Aiden's mind raced, grappling with the devastating reality that he no longer had a place in the world he had known. He was adrift, a stranger in his own skin, his very identity shattered by this inexplicable transformation. The future stretched out before him, a vast and uncertain expanse, and Aiden had no idea where to turn. With a heavy heart, he pressed on, his human legs carrying him farther and farther away from the only home he had ever known. Aiden's path was now uncharted, and the uncertainty that lay ahead filled him with a profound sense of fear and longing. But even in the midst of this turmoil, a glimmer of determination began to take root. He would find a way to reverse this transformation, no matter the cost. For Aiden was a dragon at heart, and he would not rest until he had reclaimed his true nature, even if it meant venturing into the unknown.
Chapter 2: The Encounter with the Magician.
Aiden's legs burned with each arduous step as he pushed through the dense forest, the thick canopy of trees obscuring the sky above. His heart raced with a mixture of fear, desperation, and the lingering sting of his kin's rejection. The weight of his transformation and subsequent exile from the Drakenho weighed heavily upon him, casting a pall of uncertainty over his future.
As he stumbled through the undergrowth, Aiden's mind grasped for any semblance of familiarity or guidance.
He longed for the comforting presence of his dragon companions, the soaring freedom of the skies he had once known, and the security of the only home he had ever called his own. But those were now distant memories, replaced by the disorienting reality of his human form and the vast, unknown wilderness that stretched out before him. Overcome with exhaustion, Aiden eventually collapsed against the mossy trunk of a towering pine, his chest heaving. Tears of frustration and sorrow threatened to spill from his eyes, but he fought to maintain his composure, unwilling to surrender to the overwhelming emotions that threatened to consume him. It was in this moment of despair that a peculiar sound reached Aiden's ears, the gentle rustling of fabric and the soft, measured footsteps of someone approaching. Lifting his head, Aiden's gaze fell upon a wizened, robed figure, its face obscured by a deep hood.
"My child, what troubles you so?" the figure spoke, its voice a rich, resonant timbre that seemed to carry a hint of ageless wisdom. Aiden tensed, unsure whether to trust this unexpected encounter. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice laced with wariness. "How do you know of my troubles?" The figure let out a soft chuckle, its movements unhurried as it drew closer. "I am but a humble traveler, a seeker of knowledge and wisdom who has wandered these forests for many a year. And as for your troubles, young one, they are written upon your face as clearly as the stars in the night sky." Aiden studied the figure, his brow furrowed in contemplation. There was an air of authority and mystique about this stranger that both intrigued and unnerved him. "If you are as wise as you claim, then perhaps you can help me," he said, his voice tinged with a note of desperation. I have been transformed, against my will, from a dragon to this human form. My kin have cast me out, and I know not how to return to my true nature." The figure nodded slowly, its hands disappearing into the folds of its robe. "Ah, yes, I had a feeling your plight was of a most unusual and extraordinary nature. The transformation of a dragon into a human is a rare and delicate matter, one that requires great care and understanding." Aiden leaned forward, his eyes burning with a glimmer of hope. "Then you know how to undo this sorcery? Please, you must tell me. I cannot bear the thought of remaining trapped in this alien form forever." The figure raised a hand, its fingers emerging from the sleeve to reveal a gnarled, weathered hand. "Patience, young one," it said, its tone soothing yet firm. "The path to restoring your true self is not a simple one, but I believe I can guide you." Aiden's heart leapt at the promise of the figure's words. "Please, tell me what I must do. I will do whatever it takes to reclaim my dragon nature." The figure nodded, its head tilting slightly as it studied Aiden. "It is true that your kin have cast you out, fearing the curse that has been placed upon you. But there is a way to break this enchantment, to return you to your rightful form.
Aiden listened intently, his eyes never leaving the figure's hooded face. You must journey to the Azadi Kingdom, the figure continued, and there, you must seek the hand of the princess in marriage.
Aiden's eyes widened in disbelief. The Azadi Kingdom? But they are the sworn enemies of my people. How can you ask me to wed their princess? The figure raised a hand, silencing Aiden's protests.
I understand your trepidation, young dragon, but this is the only path that will allow you to reverse the transformation. The Azadi princess holds the key to unlocking the magic that binds you to this human form.
Aiden's brow furrowed in deep contemplation.
The Azadi Kingdom was a land shrouded in mystery and conflict, a place where dragons were reviled and hunted. The thought of forging an alliance, let alone a marriage, with the Azadi royalty was enough to make his scales bristle with unease.
And what of this princess? Aiden asked, his voice tinged with skepticism.
Surely she will not willingly accept the hand of a dragon, even one in human form. That is where your wit and charm must come into play, the figure replied, a hint of amusement in its tone. You must find a way to win over the princess, to convince her that your union is not merely a political arrangement, but a true and lasting bond. Aiden's mind raced with the implications of the figure's words. The idea of marrying the Azadi princess, of infiltrating the very heart of the kingdom that had long been the enemy of his people, was a daunting prospect. And yet, the promise of regaining his true dragon form was a temptation he could not ignore. If I succeed in this task, Aiden said, his voice laced with a newfound determination, will I truly be able to reverse the transformation? Will I be able to return to my kin and reclaim my place among them? The figure nodded, its hands disappearing once more into the folds of its robe. Indeed, young dragon. Once you have taken the princess as your wife and completed the final ritual, the enchantment that binds you to this human form will be broken, and you will be restored to your true self. Aiden's heart swelled with hope, the weight of his exile and transformation momentarily lifted. Then I will do as you have instructed, he said, rising to his feet with renewed vigor. I will journey to the Azadi Kingdom and win the hand of the princess, no matter the cost. For I cannot bear the thought of remaining trapped in this alien skin forever. The figure nodded, a faint smile visible beneath the shadow of its hood. Then go, young dragon, and may the winds of fortune be at your back. The path ahead will be fraught with peril, but I have faith in your resilience and determination. With a deep breath, Aiden turned and began to make his way through the forest, his steps steadier and more confident than they had been mere moments ago. The thought of venturing into the heart of the Azadi Kingdom filled him with a mix of trepidation and resolve, but the promise of reclaiming his true self was a beacon that would guide him through the darkest of challenges. As the figure watched Aiden's retreating form, it let out a wistful sigh, its gnarled hands clasping together beneath the folds of its robe. The road ahead is a treacherous one, young dragon, it murmured, but I have no doubt that your journey will be one of great transformation, both within and without. With that, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows of the enchanted forest, leaving Aiden to face his destiny alone. Chapter 3: Journey to the Azadi Kingdom. Aiden's steps quickened as he navigated the winding paths of the enchanted forest, his mind focused on the daunting task that lay ahead. The magician's words had ignited a newfound sense of purpose within him, a glimmer of hope that he might one day reclaim his true dragon nature. Yet, the prospect of journeying to the Azadi Kingdom, the sworn enemies of his people, filled him with a deep unease. The Azadi were known for their fierce hatred of dragons, and the thought of seeking the hand of their princess in marriage seemed nearly impossible. But Aiden knew that he had no other choice if he wished to break the enchantment that had transformed him. As the forest began to thin, revealing glimpses of the rolling hills and distant mountains beyond, Aiden's pace slowed. He had spent his entire life within the familiar confines of the Drakenhoe, and the unfamiliar landscape that stretched out before him filled him with a sense of trepidation. Pausing, Aiden drew in a deep breath, his eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, he could make out the faint silhouette of towering spires, their peaks touching the sky like the talons of a great beast.
This, he knew, was the Azadi Kingdom, the very place he now had to venture towards.
Steeling his resolve, Aiden pressed on, his steps growing more confident with each passing mile. The journey would be arduous, filled with challenges and dangers he could scarcely imagine, but the promise of regaining his dragon form was a beacon that would guide him through the darkness. As the sun began to set, casting the landscape in a warm, golden glow, Aiden stumbled upon a small roadside inn. The structure, with its thatched roof and weathered wooden beams, seemed to offer a respite from the winding path that lay ahead. Hesitating for only a moment, Aiden made his way to the inn's entrance, pushing open the heavy oak door. The sound of laughter and the aroma of freshly cooked food greeted him, a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the forest. Aiden's eyes quickly scanned the crowded common room, taking in the sight of the patrons, a mix of travelers, merchants, and locals. His gaze settled on the innkeeper, a gruff-looking man with a graying beard, who eyed him with a raised brow. "Well, now, what do we have here?" the innkeeper said, his voice gruff but not unkind.
"A lone traveler, it seems. What brings you to these parts, lad?" Aiden hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal.
I'm on a journey," he replied, his voice slightly unsteady. "I seek to reach the Azadi Kingdom." The innkeeper's eyebrows shot up in surprise.
"The Azadi Kingdom, eh? That's a bold destination for a young un like yourself."
"Not many who venture that way return, if you catch my meaning."
Aiden swallowed hard, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his tunic. I have
no choice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is a matter of great importance." The innkeeper studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Well, then, you best be gettin' some rest," he finally said, reaching beneath the counter and producing a worn key. "Got a room upstairs, last door on the left.
Should be enough to see you through the night."
Aiden blinked in surprise, his hand closing around the offered key.
You're not going to ask any more questions?"
The innkeeper let out a gruff chuckle. I've seen my fair share of travelers passin' through, each with their own story to tell.
Ain't my place to pry."
He paused, a hint of sympathy creeping into his features. "Just be careful out there, lad. The roads to the Azadi Kingdom are treacherous, and the folk that call it home ain't too friendly to strangers."
Aiden nodded, his grip tightening around the key.
"Thank you," he murmured, offering the innkeeper a grateful smile. Making his way upstairs, Aiden found the room the innkeeper had mentioned and pushed open the door, stepping inside. The space was small but cozy, with a simple bed, a rickety table, and a single, flickering candle.
Sinking down onto the mattress, Aiden let out a weary sigh, his shoulders slumping with the weight of his journey.
The day's events had taken a toll, both physically and emotionally, and the prospect of venturing into the heart of the Azadi Kingdom filled him with a growing sense of trepidation. Yet, as he gazed out the window at the darkening sky, Aiden felt a renewed determination take hold. He had come too far to turn back now, and the promise of regaining his true dragon form was a goal he could not abandon. Unbuckling his worn leather boots, Aiden settled back onto the bed, his mind racing with the challenges that lay ahead. He knew that the journey to the Azadi Kingdom would be fraught with dangers, both physical and political, and that the task of winning the princess's hand in marriage would be a daunting one. But as he closed his eyes, the image of his dragon kin and the familiar peaks of the Drakenhof filled his mind. The memory of their fierce loyalty, their unwavering strength, and the sense of belonging he had once cherished fueled his resolve. "I will not give up," Aiden whispered into the stillness of the room, his voice barely audible. "I will find a way to break this enchantment and return to my true self, no matter the cost." With that, Aiden drifted off into a fitful sleep, his dreams haunted by visions of the challenges that awaited him. Yet, even in the depths of his slumber, a glimmer of hope and determination continued to burn within him, a guiding light that would see him through the trials to come. The next morning, Aiden awoke to the sound of the inn's customers stirring, their voices and the clatter of dishes filling the air. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he quickly dressed and made his way downstairs, his steps quickened by the urgency of his mission. As he stepped out into the crisp, morning air, Aiden paused, his gaze sweeping across the rolling hills and distant mountains that stretched out before him. The path to the Azadi Kingdom lay ahead, a winding road that would test his courage and resilience at every turn. Taking a deep breath, Aiden set off, his strides more confident than they had been the day before. The challenges that awaited him were daunting, but he knew that he could not afford to falter. For the sake of his kin and his own identity, he had to succeed in this perilous quest. With each step, Aiden's determination grew, fueled by the memory of his dragon heritage and the promise of reclaiming his true self. The journey might be long and treacherous, but he was prepared to face whatever obstacles stood in his way. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Aiden pressed on, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the Azadi Kingdom awaited. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he would not rest until he had fulfilled the magician's instructions and reversed the enchantment that had transformed him. Chapter 4: Meeting Princess Ilara. As the sun reached its zenith, Aiden finally caught sight of the towering spires and sprawling walls that marked the Azadi Kingdom. The vast, imposing fortress seemed to loom over the surrounding landscape, a tangible reminder of the power and influence of his people's sworn enemies. Pausing at the crest of a gently rolling hill, Aiden drew in a deep, steadying breath. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with unexpected challenges that had tested the limits of his newfound human form. But now, as he stood on the threshold of the Azadi Kingdom, a renewed sense of determination burned within him. "I have come too far to turn back now," Aiden murmured to himself, his fingers clenching into fists at his sides. With a resolute stride, he began to make his way down the winding path that led towards the kingdom's gates. As he approached the massive, fortified entrance, Aiden could feel the weight of watchful eyes upon him. The Azadi soldiers, their armor gleaming in the midday sun, studied him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Aiden held his head high, refusing to let his trepidation show, and continued on, presenting himself to the armored guards at the gate. "State your business, traveler," one of the guards barked, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Aiden steeled himself, drawing upon the lessons of diplomacy and negotiation that he had learned as a young dragon. "I seek an audience with the king and queen," he replied, his voice calm and measured. "I bear an important message that concerns the future of both our peoples." The guard's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You dare to request a meeting with the royal family? What makes you think we would grant such a privilege to a common stranger?" Aiden took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "I am no common stranger, good sir. I am Aiden, and I come bearing a request from the magician who has guided me here." The guard's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the magician, but his expression remained guarded. "The magician, you say? Very well, then. I will inform the king and queen of your presence. But make no mistake, any sign of trickery or deceit, and you will find yourself in the dungeons before you can blink." Aiden nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I have no intention of deceiving your royal family. I simply seek their aid in breaking a curse that has been placed upon me." The guard studied him for a moment longer, then gestured to one of his comrades. "See that this traveler is escorted to the palace. The king and queen will decide his fate." Aiden followed the second guard through the towering gates, his senses overwhelmed by the bustling activity of the city within. The streets were lined with merchants, artisans, and citizens going about their daily lives, all of them casting wary glances in his direction. Aiden could feel the weight of their suspicion, the undercurrent of hostility that simmered beneath the surface. As they approached the grand palace, Aiden's steps slowed, his eyes drawn to the intricate carvings and ornate architecture that adorned the massive structure. It was a sight unlike anything he had ever seen, a testament to the Azadi Kingdom's wealth and power. The guard led him through a series of ornate hallways, their footsteps echoing against the vaulted ceilings. Aiden's heart raced with each passing moment, his mind grappling with the gravity of the situation he found himself in. Finally, the guard gestured towards a set of ornate double doors. "The king and queen await you within," he said, his voice low. "Tread carefully, stranger. They do not take kindly to those who would threaten the Azadi Kingdom." Aiden nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I understand," he murmured, steeling himself before pushing open the doors and stepping into the royal audience chamber. The room was vast and opulent, its walls adorned with tapestries depicting the Azadi's military might and the grandeur of their kingdom. At the far end, seated upon a pair of elaborately carved thrones, sat the king and queen, their expressions grave and unwelcoming. Aiden paused, his eyes sweeping across the regal figures before him. The king, a stern-faced man with a thick beard, regarded him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. The queen, a woman of unearthly beauty, studied him with a sharp, calculating gaze that sent a shiver down Aiden's spine. Swallowing his nerves, Aiden stepped forward, bowing low before the royal couple. "Your Majesties," he began, his voice measured and respectful, "I come before you with a request for aid, one that may have a profound impact on the relationship between our peoples." The king raised a hand, silencing Aiden's words. "We are well aware of your kind, dragon," he growled, his voice laced with contempt. "What makes you think we would ever offer aid to one of your ilk?" Aiden straightened, his expression earnest. "I understand your mistrust, your Majesty, but I come to you not as a dragon, but as a fellow being in need of assistance. I have been transformed, against my will, from a dragon into a human form. And the magician who guided me here has told me that the only way to break this enchantment is to seek the hand of your daughter, the princess, in marriage." The king's eyes widened, a flash of shock and outrage crossing his features. "You dare to ask for such a thing?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You would dare to sully the royal bloodline by binding it to _dragon_?" Aiden held up his hands, a gesture of placation. "I do not make this request lightly, your Majesty. I have been exiled from my own people, cast out for a transformation I did not choose. All I seek is a way to return to my true self, to reclaim the life that was stolen from me." The queen, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, raised a delicate hand, silencing her husband's outraged protests. "And what guarantee do we have that you speak the truth, dragon?" she asked, her voice smooth and measured. "How can we be certain that this is not some elaborate ploy to infiltrate our kingdom and sow discord among our people?" Aiden met her gaze, his eyes burning with sincerity. "I give you my word, your Majesty, that I have no such intentions. I simply wish to be whole again, to return to the dragon I was born to be. If you will not grant me the princess's hand in marriage, then I fear I may be doomed to forever remain trapped in this alien form." The king and queen exchanged a silent, weighted look, the tension in the room palpable. Finally, the queen turned her attention back to Aiden, her expression unreadable. "Very well, dragon," she said, her voice low and measured. "We will consider your request. But understand that the price of your salvation may be higher than you are willing to pay." Aiden's heart leapt with a glimmer of hope, but he dared not let his release show. "I am prepared to do whatever it takes, your Majesty," he replied, his voice steady. "I will await your decision with the utmost patience and respect." The queen nodded, her gaze lingering on Aiden for a moment longer before she gestured to the guards. "See that our _guest_ is given suitable accommodations. We will summon him when we have reached a decision." Aiden bowed low, his mind racing with a mixture of trepidation and cautious optimism. As he was escorted from the audience chamber, he couldn't help but wonder what challenges and trials might lie ahead in his quest to win the princess's hand and break the enchantment that had transformed him. But despite the daunting road that stretched before him, Aiden was more determined than ever to reclaim his true dragon nature. He had come too far to turn back now, and with the promise of the magician's guidance, he knew that he would find a way to succeed, no matter the cost. Chapter 5: The Reluctant Marriage. The grand wedding ceremony unfolded with all the pomp and circumstance befitting the union of the Azadi Kingdom's princess and her unlikely suitor. Aiden stood at the altar, his gaze fixed on the approaching figure of Princess Ilara, his heart pounding with a mix of apprehension and the weight of the task that lay ahead. As Ilara drew nearer, Aiden couldn't help but be struck by her ethereal beauty. Her pale features were framed by a cascade of raven-black hair, and her piercing blue eyes held a guarded intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Aiden had seen the beauty of his dragon kin, their scales gleaming like polished gems, but the princess's refined elegance was something altogether different, and equally captivating. When Ilara finally reached his side, Aiden couldn't help but offer her a tentative smile, his fingers trembling slightly as he took her hand. The princess's expression, however, remained impassive, her gaze unwavering as she studied him with a hint of disdain. The ceremony proceeded with all the solemn grandeur befitting the union of the Azadi royal family, the air heavy with the weight of tradition and the unspoken tension that hung between the bride and groom. Aiden felt the eyes of the gathered guests upon him, their scrutiny a palpable force that threatened to crush him. As the final vows were exchanged, Aiden couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. This was not the joyous union he had envisioned, but a necessary step in his quest to reclaim his true dragon nature. The thought of being bound to the princess, the sworn enemy of his people, filled him with a conflicted mix of dread and determination. When the ceremony finally concluded, Aiden and Ilara were ushered into a grand, ornately decorated chamber, the opulent furnishings and lavish decor a stark contrast to the tension that permeated the air between them. Aiden lingered near the door, his gaze flickering nervously around the room, while Ilara moved to the far side of the chamber, her posture rigid and her expression unreadable. So, Ilara began, her voice cool and distant, "Here we are, bound by the chains of matrimony. I must admit, I never imagined that my first husband would be a _dragon_." Aiden swallowed hard, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his tunic. "I understand your trepidation, princess," he replied, his voice soft and measured. "This union was not of my choosing, either. But I hope that, in time, we can find a way to coexist, for the sake of reversing the enchantment that has been placed upon me." Ilara scoffed, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "Coexist? You expect me to accept the presence of _dragon_ in my kingdom, let alone in my own bedchamber?" She shook her head, her lips curving into a derisive sneer. "I have been raised to despise your kind, to see you as nothing more than savage beasts to be hunted and slain." Aiden took a step forward, his expression earnest. "I understand your hatred, princess, but I am not like the dragons you have been taught to fear. I am a victim of circumstance, just as you are. We are both caught in the web of forces beyond our control." Ilara's gaze remained unwavering, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "And what do you expect from me, _dragon_?" she spat, the word dripping with disdain. "That I should simply accept this _abomination of a marriage and welcome you with open arms?" Aiden hesitated, his mind racing to find the right words. I ask only for your patience and understanding," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of desperation. "The magician has assured me that our union is the key to breaking the enchantment that has transformed me. If you can find it within yourself to trust me, even a little, then perhaps we can work together to find a way to restore my true nature." Ilara let out a humorless laugh, the sound echoing through the opulent chamber. "Trust _dragon_? You must be truly delusional." She turned away, her shoulders rigid with tension. I will play my part in this farce of a marriage, dragon, but do not expect anything more from me than the bare minimum of what is required. My heart will never be yours, nor will I ever see you as anything more than a monster in human form." Aiden felt his heart sink at her words, the weight of her rejection pressing down upon him. He had known that winning over the Azadi princess would be a daunting task, but the raw, unyielding hostility in her gaze was like a knife to his soul. "Princess Ilara," he said, his voice quiet but unwavering, "I did not choose this path, any more than you did. But if we are to have any hope of breaking the enchantment that binds me, we must find a way to work together, to see past the animosity that has divided our peoples for generations." Ilara turned to face him, her eyes narrowed to icy slits. "You speak of working together, dragon, but I see no reason why I should place my trust in you. This marriage is a necessary evil, nothing more. I will fulfill my duty, but do not delude yourself into thinking that I will ever see you as anything more than a means to an end." Aiden opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat as he met the princess's unyielding gaze. He knew that he was treading on thin ice, that the slightest misstep could shatter the fragile truce they had forged. Summoning his courage, Aiden took a deep breath and said, "Then let us at least try to understand one another, princess. For if we cannot find a way to coexist, then I fear we may both be doomed to remain trapped in this abomination of a union." Ilara's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Very well, dragon," she said, her voice laced with reluctance. "I will try to keep an open mind. But do not mistake my willingness to cooperate as anything more than a necessity to achieve our shared goal." Aiden nodded, a flicker of hope stirring within him. "I understand, princess. And I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to ensure that this union, however reluctant, serves the greater good of both our peoples." Ilara regarded him with a skeptical eye, but Aiden could sense a glimmer of curiosity beneath her guarded demeanor. Perhaps, in time, he could find a way to chip away at the wall she had built around her heart, to forge a connection that went beyond the confines of their arranged marriage. As the sun began to set, casting the chamber in a warm, golden glow, Aiden and Ilara found themselves standing in uneasy silence, the weight of their uncertain future hanging heavy in the air. But despite the daunting challenges that lay ahead, Aiden was determined to find a way to break the enchantment that had transformed him, even if it meant navigating the treacherous waters of his newfound marriage. For in the depths of his heart, Aiden still yearned to reclaim his true dragon nature, to soar through the skies once more and rejoin his kin. And if that meant forging an unlikely alliance with the princess of the Azadi Kingdom, then so be it. He would face whatever trials and tribulations awaited him, his resolve as unbreakable as the scales that had once adorned his body. With a deep, steadying breath, Aiden turned to Ilara, his gaze unwavering. "Princess, I know that this is not a union of our choosing, but I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to ensure that it is a successful one. For the sake of both our peoples, we must find a way to work together." Ilara regarded him with a weary sigh, her posture slowly relaxing as she met his earnest gaze. "Very well, dragon," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of resignation. "Then let us begin this partnership and see where it may lead us." As the newlywed couple faced the uncertain future that lay before them, the air around them crackled with a palpable tension, but beneath the surface, a glimmer of possibility began to take root, a faint hope that perhaps, through their shared adversity, they could forge a connection that would transcend the centuries-old divide between their peoples. Chapter 6: The Enchanted Forest Awaits. The days that followed Aiden and Ilara's reluctant union were fraught with tension and uncertainty. The newly wedded couple found themselves navigating the delicate political landscape of the Azadi Kingdom, their every move scrutinized by the wary gaze of the royal court. Aiden, acutely aware of the distrust and hostility that permeated the kingdom, made every effort to remain cordial and deferential in his interactions with the Azadi nobles. He understood that a single misstep could jeopardize the fragile truce he had forged with Ilara, and with it, his best chance at reversing the enchantment that had transformed him. Ilara, for her part, maintained a cool and aloof demeanor, her icy gaze betraying little of the inner turmoil that Aiden knew she must be experiencing. The princess had made it clear that she had no desire to forge a genuine connection with her dragon-turned-human husband, and Aiden could hardly blame her. Yet, despite the palpable tension that hung between them, Aiden sensed a glimmer of curiosity beneath Ilara's guarded exterior. There were moments, fleeting as they were, when her gaze would linger on him, her expression softening ever so slightly, as if she were trying to reconcile the man before her with the monstrous caricature of dragons she had been taught to fear. It was during one such moment, as they sat together in the palace gardens, that the magician's familiar voice suddenly echoed through the air. "Aiden, my child," the magician said, his weathered face emerging from the shadows, "the time has come to take the next step in your journey." Aiden rose to his feet, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. "Magician," he said, his voice laced with reverence, "what must I do now?" The magician's eyes crinkled with a hint of a smile as he turned his gaze to Ilara. "Princess Ilara, your role in this quest is now more vital than ever. The final ritual to break the enchantment that binds Aiden to his human form can only be completed with your assistance." Ilara's brow furrowed, her expression guarded. "What do you mean, magician? What is this final ritual you speak of?" The magician's expression grew solemn. "Aiden must bathe in the waters of the enchanted forest lake, a place where poisonous nymphs dwell. But to do so, he will need your protection, your guidance, and your trust." Aiden felt a shiver run down his spine at the mention of the enchanted forest and its treacherous inhabitants. He had heard whispers of the nymphs, ethereal and beautiful yet deadly, and the prospect of venturing into their domain filled him with a sense of dread. Ilara, too, seemed unsettled by the magician's words, her fingers clenching the fabric of her gown. "You would have me accompany this _dragon_ into the enchanted forest?" she asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "How can I be sure that this is not some ploy to infiltrate our kingdom and sow discord among my people?" The magician raised a weathered hand, his eyes meeting Ilara's with unwavering sincerity. "Princess, I understand your distrust, but I assure you that Aiden's intentions are pure. The fate of both your peoples hangs in the balance, and only you possess the power to guide him through the perils that await." Aiden stepped forward, his gaze beseeching. "Princess Ilara, I know that this is a great imposition, and that my mere presence must be a constant reminder of the enmity between our peoples. But I implore you, if there is any chance of me regaining my true dragon nature, I must complete this ritual. And I cannot do so without your aid." Ilara's eyes narrowed as she studied Aiden, her lips pressed into a thin, contemplative line. The tension in the air was palpable, the weight of the decision she faced evident in the furrow of her brow. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Ilara rose to her feet, her posture stiff but resolute. "Very well, magician," she said, her voice laced with resignation. "I will accompany this _Aiden_ to the enchanted forest and ensure that he completes the ritual. But know that I do this not out of any desire to aid you, but out of a need to protect my kingdom and my people." The magician nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I understand, princess. Your loyalty to your kingdom is admirable, and it is precisely that which will be the key to Aiden's salvation." Turning to Aiden, the magician placed a weathered hand on his shoulder, his eyes brimming with a mix of solemnity and reassurance. "The path ahead will be fraught with peril, my child. The nymphs of the enchanted forest are creatures of great beauty and even greater malice. You must be vigilant, and you must trust in the princess to guide you through the dangers that lie ahead." Aiden nodded, his expression resolute. "I understand, magician. Whatever challenges await me in the enchanted forest, I will face them with determination and courage. For the sake of regaining my true self, I will not falter." The magician's grip tightened momentarily, his gaze holding Aiden's with unwavering intensity. "Then go, my child,
and may the winds of fortune be at your back. The future of both your peoples hangs in the balance." With a final nod, the magician disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Aiden and Ilara to grapple with the weight of the task that lay before them. Turning to the princess, Aiden couldn't help but feel a surge of trepidation. "Princess Ilara," he said, his voice measured, "I know that this is a great imposition, and that you have little reason to trust in my sincerity. But I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to ensure the safety of both our peoples as we venture into the enchanted forest." Ilara regarded him with a cool expression, her arms folded across her chest. "I will hold you to that promise, _dragon_," she replied, her tone laced with a hint of warning. "For if you so much as put a toe out of line, I will not hesitate to have you struck down where you stand." Aiden nodded, his heart racing with a mix of trepidation and determination. "I understand, princess. I will not betray your trust, nor that of your people. This quest is as much for my own sake as it is for the sake of our shared future." Ilara's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something akin to curiosity passing across her features. But before Aiden could discern its meaning, her expression had hardened once more, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Then let us be on our way," she said, her voice resolute. "The sooner we complete this ritual, the sooner we can put this _alliance_ behind us." Aiden felt a pang of disappointment at her words, but he knew that now was not the time to dwell on the complexities of their relationship. The enchanted forest and its treacherous nymphs awaited, and he could not afford to let his guard down for a single moment. With a deep breath, Aiden fell into step beside Ilara, the two of them setting out on a journey that would test the limits of their trust, their courage, and their very survival. Chapter 7: Navigating the Enchanted Forest. The enchanted forest loomed before them, its tangled canopy of towering trees casting a foreboding shadow over the winding path. Aiden could feel the weight of Ilara's scrutiny as she studied the ominous landscape, her posture rigid with tension. "Are you certain this is the only way, dragon?" the princess asked, her voice betraying a hint of trepidation. Aiden drew in a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the treacherous terrain that lay ahead. "I'm afraid so, princess," he replied, his tone measured. "According to the magician, the enchanted forest is the only place where I can complete the ritual to break the enchantment that binds me to this human form." Ilara's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "And you trust the word of this magician? How do we know he is not leading us into a trap, or playing some elaborate game with the lives of our peoples?" Aiden turned to face the princess, his expression earnest. "I understand your skepticism, Ilara, but the magician has been nothing but honest with me. He has shown me no reason to doubt his sincerity, and I believe he is truly invested in restoring my true dragon nature." The princess studied him for a moment, her gaze searching. "Very well, then," she said, her voice tinged with resignation. "Lead the way, dragon. But know that I will be watching your every move, and the slightest hint of treachery will be met with swift and merciless retribution." Aiden nodded, his heart swelling with a renewed sense of determination. "I understand, princess. I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to ensure the success of this quest, for the sake of both our peoples." With that, Aiden turned and set off into the enchanted forest, Ilara following close behind. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint whispers of unseen creatures, and Aiden couldn't help but feel a shiver of apprehension run down his spine. As they navigated the twisting, root-riddled paths, Aiden found himself acutely aware of his newfound human senses. The once familiar sounds and smells of the forest were now muted and distorted, leaving him feeling disoriented and vulnerable. Ilara, on the other hand, seemed to move with the grace and confidence that belied her regal upbringing. Her eyes scanned the surroundings with a practiced gaze, her steps nimble and sure-footed as she followed Aiden's lead. "You seem surprisingly at ease in this environment, princess," Aiden remarked, his brow furrowed with curiosity. Ilara's lips curved into a faint, sardonic smile.
I've been trained in the ways of the wilderness since I was a child, dragon. It's a necessary skill for one who is tasked with the protection of the Azadi Kingdom.
Aiden nodded, a newfound respect for the princess's capabilities blossoming within him. I see.
Then I am grateful to have you by my side as we navigate the perils of this enchanted forest.
Ilara's expression remained guarded, but Aiden caught a fleeting glimpse of something akin to approval in her eyes.
Don't mistake my presence here as anything more than a pragmatic necessity, dragon, she said, her tone clipped. I am doing this to ensure the safety of my kingdom, nothing more. Aiden opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of a faint rustling in the undergrowth immediately drew his attention. Instinctively, he raised a hand, signaling Ilara to halt.
What is it?
The princess whispered, her hand hovering near the hilt of her dagger. Aiden's eyes scanned the dense foliage, his senses straining to detect the source of the disturbance.
I'm not sure,
he murmured, but I have a feeling we are not alone.
Suddenly, a flash of movement caught his eye, and Aiden tensed, his body poised to react.
But before he could act, a figure emerged from the shadows, a creature unlike any he had ever seen. It was a nymph, its ethereal beauty captivating and terrifying in equal measure. Its lithe, silvery form seemed to dance and shimmer, its features a mesmerizing blend of delicate grace and unsettling allure. Aiden felt his breath catch in his throat, his mind reeling with the realization that they had encountered one of the legendary guardians of the enchanted forest. Beside him, Ilara had drawn her dagger, her eyes narrowed with wary determination.
The nymph's gaze settled upon them, its eyes gleaming with a predatory intensity.
Trespassers, it hissed, its voice like the whisper of 1,000 rustling leaves.
You dare to intrude upon our sacred domain? Aiden swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest.
We mean you no harm, noble nymph, he said, his voice trembling slightly. We seek only to complete a ritual that will restore my true dragon nature. The nymph's eyes widened, a malicious grin spreading across its ethereal features. Ah, so the dragon seeks to reclaim what has been taken from him, it purred, its movements shifting with a fluid, hypnotic grace.
Then you have come to the wrong place, fool.
For here, in the enchanted forest, the nymphs will not allow you to escape your curse so easily.
Ilara stepped forward, her dagger held at the ready.
Stand aside, creature, she demanded, her voice laced with authority. Our quest is of the utmost importance, and we will not be deterred by your petty threats. The nymph's gaze shifted to the princess, its expression darkening with disdain.
And what is the Azadi to us, You are no less a trespasser than the dragon, princess.
Your kind has long been the bane of our existence, and we will not hesitate to add you to the list of those who have dared to challenge our domain.
Aiden felt a surge of panic as the nymph's words registered, and he quickly stepped in front of Ilara, shielding her from the creature's wrath. Please, noble nymph, he pleaded, we mean you no harm. All we ask is to be allowed to complete the ritual and be on our way. Surely, you can grant us this one boon? The nymph's eyes narrowed, its gaze flickering between Aiden and Ilara with calculating intensity.
Perhaps, it mused, its voice dripping with false benevolence.
But first, you must prove your worth, dragon. Overcome the challenges we have set forth, and perhaps we will grant you safe passage to the enchanted lake.
Aiden felt a shiver of trepidation run down his spine, but he knew that he had no choice but to accept the nymph's terms. Very well, he said, his voice steady.
What must we do?
The nymph's lips curled into a sinister smile.
You will see, dragon, it said, its form dissolving back into the shadows.
The enchanted forest has many surprises in store for those who dare to trespass upon our domain.
As the nymph's presence faded, Aiden turned to Ilara, his expression grave.
Princess, I fear we have no choice but to accept the nymph's challenge. The fate of our peoples rests upon our ability to reach the enchanted lake and complete the ritual. Ilara's jaw tightened, her knuckles white as she gripped her dagger. "I am aware of the stakes, dragon," she said, her voice laced with determination. "But do not think for a moment that I trust these creatures to keep their word. We must be vigilant, and we must be prepared to face whatever challenges they have in store for us." Aiden nodded, his own resolve hardening. "Then let us move forward, princess. The enchanted forest awaits, and we must be ready to face whatever trials lie ahead." With a shared sense of purpose, Aiden and Ilara continued their journey, their footsteps quickening as they delved deeper into the treacherous heart of the enchanted forest, the looming threat of the nymphs ever present in their minds. Chapter 8: The Nymph's Lair. The enchanted forest grew increasingly dense and foreboding as Aiden and Ilara pressed onward, their senses on high alert for any sign of the treacherous nymphs. The air was thick with the scent of ancient magic, and the whispers of unseen creatures seemed to echo from every shadowed nook and crevice. Ilara's grip on her dagger tightened with each step, her gaze scanning the tangled undergrowth for any sudden movement. Aiden, for his part, felt a mixture of trepidation and determination coursing through him. The fate of his dragon identity hung in the balance, and he knew that he could not afford to falter, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. As they neared the rumored location of the enchanted lake, the forest began to take on an even more ominous air. The trees stood taller, their branches twisting and gnarled, and the ground beneath their feet became increasingly treacherous, littered with slippery moss and jagged roots. Aiden paused, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We must be close," he murmured, his gaze sweeping across the eerie landscape. "The nymph's lair can't be far from here." Ilara nodded, her eyes narrowed. "Then we must be vigilant," she said, her voice low and tense. "These creatures will not make our task an easy one." As if in response to her words, a sudden rustling in the nearby undergrowth caused both of them to tense, their weapons at the ready. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest as he strained to catch a glimpse of their elusive adversaries, his senses heightened by the weight of their quest. Suddenly, a shimmering, ethereal form emerged from the shadows, its movements graceful and mesmerizing. Aiden felt his breath catch in his throat as he recognized the distinctive features of a nymph, its delicate features and flowing silver hair a striking contrast to the gnarled trees that surrounded them. "Welcome, trespassers," the nymph purred, its voice like the whisper of 1,000 wind chimes. "So good of you to join us." Ilara stepped forward, her dagger held steady. "Where is the enchanted lake, creature?" she demanded, her tone laced with barely contained fury. "We have come too far to be deterred by your petty games." The nymph's lips curved into a mocking smile, its eyes glinting with malicious intent. "Ah, the princess of the Azadi Kingdom," it said, its tone dripping with disdain. "I should have known you would be accompanying your dragon_husband_ on this foolish quest." Aiden felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him, and he moved to stand beside Ilara, his own posture tense and ready for action. "We are here to complete the ritual, nymph," he said, his voice firm. "And we will not be denied, no matter the cost." The nymph's gaze shifted to Aiden, its expression darkening. "Ah, the dragon it spat, its eyes narrowing to slits. "You think you can simply waltz into our domain and claim what is rightfully ours? The enchanted lake is the heart of our kingdom, and we will not relinquish it to the likes of you." Ilara's grip on her dagger tightened, her knuckles turning white. "Then we shall take it by force, if necessary," she declared, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. The nymph's ethereal form began to shimmer and dance, its movements growing increasingly erratic. "Foolish mortals," it hissed, its voice echoing through the forest like a ghostly wail. "You have no idea the power that resides within the enchanted lake. To bathe in its waters is to invite the very wrath of the nymphs themselves." Aiden felt a chill run down his spine at the nymph's words, but he refused to back down. "Then we shall face your wrath, creature," he said, his voice steady. "For the sake of my true dragon nature, I will not be deterred." The nymph's laughter rang out, a haunting and unsettling sound that seemed to reverberate through the very fabric of the forest. "So be it, dragon," it said, its form dissolving into a swirling mist. "But know that you and your Azadi princess will face the full might of the nymph's fury." As the nymph's presence faded, Aiden and Ilara found themselves surrounded by a growing number of the ethereal creatures, their movements swift and predatory. Aiden felt his heart pounding in his chest as he took in the sight of the nymphs, their beauty and grace belying the darkness that lurked within them. Ilara stepped forward, her dagger raised in a defensive stance. "We must find a way to reach the enchanted lake," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "If we can complete the ritual, it may be our only chance to escape this place." Aiden nodded, his mind racing as he searched for a way to navigate the treacherous path ahead. "But how can we hope to bypass these creatures?" he asked, his gaze darting from one nymph to the next. "They seem determined to prevent us from reaching our destination." Ilara's eyes narrowed as she studied the nymphs, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps we can use their vanity against them," she said, a glimmer of a plan forming in her mind. "If we can distract them, it may give us the opening we need to reach the lake." Aiden's brow furrowed, his gaze shifting to Ilara. "What do you have in mind, princess?" Ilara's lips curved into a determined smile. "Just follow my lead, dragon," she said, her voice taking on a confident, authoritative tone. "And be ready to move the moment the opportunity presents itself." Without another word, Ilara stepped forward, her posture regal and her gaze unwavering as she addressed the swarm of nymphs. "Creatures of the enchanted forest," she proclaimed, her voice carrying a hint of lofty disdain, "we have come to pay homage to the beauty and power that resides within your domain." The nymphs paused, their movements momentarily stilled as they regarded the princess with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Aiden watched in awe as Ilara continued, her words flowing with a practiced elegance. "As the future queen of the Azadi Kingdom, I cannot help but be mesmerized by your ethereal grace," Ilara said, her tone dripping with a false reverence. "Surely, one such as I, with an eye for beauty and splendor, would make a worthy offering to your enchanted lake." The nymphs began to murmur among themselves, their expressions shifting from hostility to a cautious interest. Aiden felt a surge of hope as he realized Ilara's plan. By appealing to the nymphs' vanity and desire for adoration, she was creating a distraction that might grant them the opening they needed. Seizing the moment, Aiden moved forward, his steps swift and silent as he made his way towards the shimmering surface of the enchanted lake. Ilara continued to captivate the nymphs with her eloquent praises, her words like a siren's song that held the creatures in rapt attention. As Aiden reached the edge of the lake, he paused, his gaze fixed on the tranquil waters before him. This was it, the final step in the ritual that would restore his true dragon nature. With a deep breath, he steeled his resolve and prepared to enter the water, his mind filled with a mixture of trepidation and determination. But just as he was about to step into the lake, a sudden movement in the corner of his eye caught his attention. Whirling around, Aiden found himself face to face with a swarm of nymphs, their once captivated expressions now twisted with fury. "Betrayal," one of the nymphs screeched, its voice piercing the air like a shard of ice. "You would dare to trick us, Azadi princess?" Ilara's eyes widened, her confident facade crumbling as she realized that their ruse had been discovered. "No, wait," she cried, but her words were drowned out by the enraged howls of the nymphs. Aiden's heart raced as he braced himself for the onslaught, his mind desperately searching for a way to reach the enchanted lake and complete the ritual. The fate of his dragon identity hung in the balance, and he knew that he could not afford to fail, no matter the cost. With a surge of determination, Aiden turned and plunged into the shimmering waters of the enchanted lake, his mind filled with a single, unwavering goal: to emerge from its depths as the dragon he was born to be. Chapter 9: The Transformation Completed. In a blinding burst of light and energy, Aiden's body was enveloped by the shimmering waters of the enchanted lake. The nymphs' enraged howls echoed all around him, but Aiden could barely hear them over the thunderous pounding of his own heart. As the waters closed over him, Aiden felt a surge of power coursing through his veins, a familiar sensation that had been dormant for far too long. His limbs lengthened, his bones shifting and reforming, and a familiar warmth began to spread across his skin. Aiden opened his eyes, his vision now sharper and more attuned to the primal rhythms of the forest. The nymph's ethereal forms seemed to dance and shimmer before him, their movements no longer mesmerizing, but rather a challenge to be met head-on. With a mighty roar, Aiden burst forth from the lake, his powerful wings unfurling and sending a shower of glittering droplets into the air. His scales, once dull and lifeless, now gleamed with a vibrant, iridescent sheen, and his sharp talons flexed with the familiar weight of his true dragon form. Ilara, who had been fending off the nymph's relentless assault, paused in awe as she witnessed Aiden's transformation. Her eyes widened, her expression a mix of wonder and trepidation, as the majestic dragon towered before her. The nymphs, too, seemed to falter, their initial bravado giving way to a hint of fear as they beheld Aiden's restored power. Their shrill cries echoed through the forest, and they began to retreat, their movements erratic and unsure. Aiden fixed his gaze upon the nymphs, his deep, rumbling voice resonating with a primal authority. "Your reign of terror ends here, creatures of the enchanted forest," he declared, his words laced with a mixture of triumph and righteous fury. "I have reclaimed my true nature, and I will not allow you to stand in the way of my destiny." With a mighty sweep of his wings, Aiden launched himself into the air, his powerful form cutting through the dense foliage like a bolt of lightning. The nymphs scrambled to evade his onslaught, their ethereal bodies darting and weaving, but they were no match for the raw, unrestrained might of the dragon. Ilara watched in awe as Aiden deftly maneuvered through the forest, his movements graceful and decisive. She had seen the power of dragons in battle before, but the sheer majesty and ferocity of Aiden's transformation left her breathless. As the nymphs retreated deeper into the enchanted forest, Aiden landed before Ilara, his massive head lowering until he was eye to eye with the princess. Ilara held her ground, her expression a mix of apprehension and curiosity, as Aiden regarded her with a newfound sense of purpose. "Princess Ilara," Aiden rumbled, his voice deep and resonant, "I owe you a debt of gratitude. Without your aid, I would not have been able to complete the ritual and reclaim my true dragon nature." Ilara blinked, her lips parting in surprise. I merely did what was necessary to ensure the success of our quest," she replied, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. "I had no desire to see you triumph, dragon, only to see the threat to my kingdom averted." Aiden's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of understanding passing across his features. "I see," he said, his tone measured. "Then perhaps it is time we put aside our differences and work towards a common goal, the betterment of both our peoples." Ilara's brow furrowed, her gaze searching Aiden's imposing form. "What are you suggesting, dragon?" she asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "I am suggesting that we forge an alliance, Princess," Aiden replied, his words heavy with significance. "An alliance that would see the end of the centuries-old enmity between our peoples, and the beginning of a new era of cooperation and understanding." Ilara's eyes widened, her expression a mix of disbelief and trepidation. "You cannot be serious," she breathed, her fingers tightening around the hilt of her dagger. "After all that has transpired between our peoples, how could you possibly expect me to trust _dragon_?" Aiden let out a rumbling sigh, his massive head tilting slightly. "I understand your hesitation, Ilara," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "The wounds of the past run deep, and the distrust between our peoples is deeply ingrained. But I believe that if we can set aside our differences and work together, we can build a future where dragons and humans no longer need to be adversaries." Ilara remained silent, her gaze fixed on Aiden's imposing form. The weight of his words, and the implications they carried, hung heavy in the air, and she found herself grappling with a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. After a long moment, Ilara took a deep breath and straightened her posture, her expression resolute. "You speak of a future that seems almost impossibly distant, dragon," she said, her voice stern but not unkind.
but I will not dismiss your proposal outright. If there is truly a chance for our peoples to find common ground and forge a lasting peace, then I will at least consider the possibility. Aiden's eyes brightened with a glimmer of hope, and he dipped his head in a respectful nod. I understand, Princess, he said, his voice tinged with gratitude. That is all I can ask for, and more than I had dared to hope for. Turning his gaze towards the distant horizon, Aiden let out a deep, rumbling sigh. Now that I have reclaimed my true form, I must decide the path that lies ahead of me, he murmured, his words heavy with the weight of contemplation. Ilara watched him, her expression unreadable. And what will you choose, dragon? She asked, her voice soft but unwavering. Aiden's eyes narrowed as he considered the question, the flicker of indecision passing across his regal features. I am not sure, he admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Part of me yearns to return to my kin, to reclaim my place among the dragons of the Drakenho. But another part of me is drawn to the possibility of forging a new future, one where our peoples might coexist in peace. Ilara nodded, her gaze thoughtful. It is a heavy decision to bear, she said, her voice laced with a hint of empathy. One that will not only shape your own destiny, but the fate of our two peoples as well. Aiden turned his attention back to Ilara, his expression solemn. Then I shall take the time to carefully consider my options, Princess, he said, his voice resolute. For the decision I make will have far-reaching consequences, and I must be certain that it is the right one, not only for myself, but for all those who will be affected by it. Ilara held Aiden's gaze, her own expression softening ever so slightly. Then I wish you the wisdom and clarity to make the choice that will bring about the greatest good, she said, her words carrying a sincerity that surprised even her. As Aiden spread his wings and took to the skies, Ilara watched his majestic form disappear into the distance, her mind racing with the implications of the decision that lay before him. The future, once shrouded in uncertainty, now seemed to hold the promise of a new, uncharted path, one that might just lead to the reconciliation of their long-divided peoples. With a deep breath, Ilara turned and began to make her way back towards the Azadi Kingdom, her steps burdened by the weight of her own contemplation. Whatever Aiden's decision might be, she knew that it would have a profound impact on the course of her own life, and the lives of those she had sworn to protect. Chapter 10: A New Beginning. The cool night breeze rustled the leaves of the enchanted forest, its gentle whispers underscored by the faint chirping of nocturnal creatures. Aiden, the once transformed dragon, now restored to his true form, soared effortlessly through the starlit sky, his magnificent wings carrying him ever higher. Below, the familiar peaks of the Drakenho loomed in the distance, a tempting pull that tugged at the depths of his soul. It was to this land, the birthplace of his dragon kin, that he had once called home, a place of comfort and belonging. But now, as he glided above the towering mountains, a sense of hesitation and uncertainty weighed heavily upon him. Aiden's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with the implications of the choice that lay before him. On one hand, the prospect of reuniting with his dragon brethren, of reclaiming his rightful place in the Drakenho, was a siren's call that he could not ignore. The familiarity and security of his ancestral home held an undeniable allure, a promise of a future where he could simply be himself, without the burden of the human world's conflicts and complexities. Yet, the words of Princess Ilara, and the possibility of forging a lasting alliance between dragons and humans, lingered in the back of his mind, a tantalizing alternative that he could not dismiss. The thought of bridging the divide that had long separated his people from the Azadi Kingdom was both daunting and intriguing, a challenge that beckoned him to reconsider the path he had once taken for granted. As Aiden soared, his keen gaze swept across the landscape below, taking in the sprawling expanse of the enchanted forest and the distant silhouette of the Azadi Kingdom's towering spires. It was in this moment, suspended between the realms of his past and his future, that Aiden felt a profound sense of responsibility, not just to himself, but to the fate of both his dragon kin and the human world. With a deep, rumbling sigh, Aiden banked his wings and began to descend, his mind made up.
The time had come to confront the choice that would shape the course of his destiny, and he knew that he could not do so alone. Aiden's massive form touched down just outside the Azadi Kingdom's gates, his presence immediately drawing the wary attention of the guards. But before they could react, Aiden raised a clawed hand, his voice resonating with a commanding authority. "I seek an audience with the king and queen," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I have a matter of the utmost importance to discuss with them." The guards, their initial trepidation giving way to a mix of awe and uncertainty, quickly ushered Aiden into the castle, their footsteps echoing through the grand, ornate halls. Aiden followed them, his regal bearing commanding the attention of the Azadi nobility who crossed his path, their expressions a blend of fascination and unease. Finally, Aiden found himself once more in the presence of the king and queen, their faces a mask of cautious curiosity as they regarded the majestic dragon before them. "You have returned, dragon," the king said, his voice laced with a hint of suspicion. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Aiden straightened his shoulders, meeting the king's gaze with unwavering resolve. "Your Majesty, I come before you not as an enemy, but as a seeker of understanding and cooperation." The king's brow furrowed, his expression hardening. "Cooperation? After the centuries of enmity between our peoples, you expect us to simply accept your words at face value?" Ilara, who had been standing quietly beside her parents, stepped forward, her own gaze resting upon Aiden with an unreadable expression. "Father, perhaps we should hear what the dragon has to say." The king turned to his daughter, his features softening ever so slightly. "Ilara, you cannot truly be suggesting that we trust the word of this creature. Ilara held up a hand, her posture resolute. "I am merely suggesting that we listen, father. After all, it was the dragon's quest that led to the resolution of the threat posed by the nymphs of the enchanted forest. Surely, that counts for something." The king's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he regarded Aiden with a renewed sense of scrutiny. "Very well, then," he conceded, his tone laced with reluctance. "Speak, dragon, and let us see if your words hold any merit." Aiden nodded, his gaze sweeping across the royal family. "Your Majesties, I come to you today with a proposal that I believe will benefit both our peoples. The time has come for us to put aside the centuries of animosity that have divided our worlds, and to forge a new path, one of cooperation, understanding, and lasting peace." The king's expression hardened, his lips parting to voice his inevitable protest, but Ilara quickly raised a hand, silencing him. "Please, continue, dragon," the princess said, her voice calm and measured. Aiden took a deep breath, his words flowing with a sense of conviction that seemed to captivate the royal family. "For too long, our peoples have been pitted against one another, driven by fear, mistrust, and a refusal to see the common ground that lies between us. But I believe that if we can set aside our differences and work together, we can build a future where dragons and humans no longer need to be adversaries." The king's brow furrowed, his gaze shifting between Aiden and his daughter. "And what, exactly, are you proposing, dragon?" "I propose a formal alliance between our peoples," Aiden declared, his voice resonating with a sense of gravity. "A union forged not through the bonds of marriage, as I had once been instructed, but through a deeper understanding and a shared commitment to the betterment of our worlds." The king's eyes widened, his expression a mix of disbelief and outrage. "An alliance? You dare to suggest that we, the Azadi, should align ourselves with the very creatures we have sworn to destroy?" Ilara stepped forward, her posture commanding the room's attention. "Father, please, hear the dragon out. His proposal may hold the key to a future where our peoples no longer need to be adversaries." The king's gaze locked with his daughter's, a silent battle of wills playing out before Aiden's watchful eyes. Finally, with a resigned sigh, the king turned his attention back to the dragon. "Very well, dragon," he said, his voice tinged with reluctance. "I will listen to your proposal. But know that it will take more than mere words to convince me of its merit. Aiden dipped his head in a respectful nod, his expression solemn.
I understand, Your Majesty.
And I am prepared to prove the sincerity of my intentions, no matter the cost. With that, Aiden launched into a detailed explanation of his vision for a future where dragons and humans could coexist in harmony, his words laced with a passion and conviction that seemed to captivate the royal family. As he spoke, Ilara listened intently, her features softening with a newfound sense of hope, while the king's expression, though initially skeptical, slowly began to shift, his own prejudices and preconceptions challenged by the dragon's impassioned plea. By the time Aiden had finished, the air in the chamber was thick with a palpable tension, the weight of his proposal hanging heavy between the three of them.
The king, his brow furrowed in deep contemplation, finally broke the silence.
Your words are compelling, dragon, he admitted, his voice reluctant but thoughtful. And the prospect of an end to the centuries of conflict between our peoples is certainly intriguing. Aiden felt a flicker of hope flare to life within him, but he remained silent, allowing the king to continue. However, the king said, his gaze hardening, I will need more than mere words to convince me of the viability of such an alliance. You will need to prove, through your actions and your continued commitment, that you and your dragon kin are worthy of our trust.
Aiden nodded, his expression resolute. I understand, Your Majesty. And I am prepared to do whatever it takes to demonstrate the sincerity of my proposal.
The king's eyes narrowed, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips.
Very well, then, dragon.
Let us begin this _alliance_ and see where it may lead us. As Aiden and the royal family discussed the details of their newfound partnership, the air in the chamber seemed to crackle with a palpable sense of possibility. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and potential pitfalls, but for the first time in generations, the prospect of a future where dragons and humans could coexist in harmony seemed within reach. Aiden, his heart swelling with a mix of trepidation and hope, knew that the true test of his decision would lie in the actions that followed. But as he stood before the Azadi royalty, his gaze meeting Ilara's with a newfound sense of kinship, he felt a renewed determination take hold. The journey ahead would be long and arduous, but Aiden was ready to face it, his dragon nature fully restored and his vision for a better future burning brighter than ever before. With each step, he would strive to build the bridges that would unite his people and the Azadi, forging a path that would echo through the ages and inspire generations to come. It was a daunting task, to be sure, but Aiden was no longer alone in his quest. With the Azadi Kingdom at his side, and the promise of a future where dragons and humans could walk the same lands in peace, he knew that the impossible was within reach. And so, with a deep breath and a renewed sense of purpose, Aiden turned his gaze towards the horizon, his wings unfurling as he prepared to take flight, embarking on a new chapter of his life, one that would shape the destiny of both his dragon kin and the human world he had once feared.